Welcome back to Epic Exchanges. I am thrilled to be back again this week. We're kind of coming at you quick and fast over the last few weeks with an episode every week instead of every other week. And I am really excited to have Melissa Armstrong with us to share her story. So, Melissa, why don't you tell us first a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks for having me here, Kelly. I own my own private consulting practice, Holistic Health. I'm a nurse turned trauma-informed functional health coach. I help women overcome personal and intergenerational trauma to heal their mind, body, and spirit so they can achieve true, lasting inner peace and emotional freedom.
Awesome. Well, as most people who kind of end up in this realm of coaching and really helping people heal, it's often sparked by our own stories and our own experiences in life. So why don't you just dive in and tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. So, my childhood, I grew up in a very traumatic, chaotic, abusive household. My parents were both addicts. My dad was very physically abusive toward my mom. I'm one of four kids, and he would often beat my mom up in the living room right in front of us, with no regard of if we were there or not. They and then everything that went along with that, the addiction and everything, periods of homelessness, people in and out of the house, just kind of a general sense of like not being safe and not knowing what was going to happen next. Um, my parents divorced finally when I was about 6, and my dad left and never came back. Um, I did hear from him from time to time, but very rarely, like probably you could count on one or two hands how many times I ever talked to him on the phone, never really saw him, didn't have a relationship with him. As a result of everything that my mom had been through with my dad and everything that I later learned she had endured during her childhood, the trauma that she had gone through with her parents and all of that, she was very emotionally abusive and or emotionally unavailable, I say, and verbally abusive. Um, she was just really traumatized in her own way. And really, the trauma goes back many generations in my family, as you start to learn is pretty common with this sort of like addiction trauma kind of stuff. And then uh, after that continued. My mom's verbal abuse and emotional disconnection continued through my childhood and teenage years. I was molested when I was 11, and then I was survived a school shooting when I was 15. The shooter was a friend of mine, was at my house the night before it happened. I had no idea and had a lot of guilt, post traumatic stress, all the things that came along with that. And then when I was 18, my brother, who was 5 years older than me, was killed in a tragic accident right in front of me. So I spent from the time that I was 18 until into my 20s, I spent all of those years very unwell, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I was often struggled with suicidal thoughts. I was very my post traumatic stress led me to have debilitating anxiety, panic, insomnia. Eventually, all of that manifested into a lot of physical symptoms. I had, rashes all over my body. I had digestive issues. I had migraines. When my brother died, I decided that I wanted to become a nurse because I wanted to help people. I think I was always born to be a healer just because of the family I was born into. And I knew from a young age that I wanted to help people. I used to say I was going to be a doctor when I was really little. And when he died, I realized that nursing was really my love. I wanted to help people. And so, I declared nursing as my major, started into nursing, started on that path along, at that same time that I was dealing with my own medical and psychological issues. And I was really, as a patient, I was met with, I feel like the system failed me. I was met with pills. Doctors just like, yeah, you're depressed. Here, take these antidepressants. Yeah, you have a rash. Here, take these steroids. Um, never, never was I asked about stress management, trauma, my diet, anything. They just gave me pills, sleeping pills, antidepressants, all of that, you name it. And how I even got through nursing school when I was dealing with all of that, I don't really know. When I was about in my early 20s, probably about 24, was when I had just become a nurse, and my now husband, then boyfriend, suggested, reflected back to me like, you are just very anxious all of the time. It was really bad. I was beside myself with panic. I couldn't even go to the grocery store most of the time. I would be up all night, crying for no real significant reason other than I was just consumed with panic. Um, and he reflected that back to me and was like, it seems like you just need to like calm down. And if you could just calm down somehow, you would probably feel a lot better. And he had no medical knowledge or anything. He was just simply like reflecting back to me what he saw. And he said, have you ever tried meditation? Have you ever heard about meditation? And I thought, well, I mean, what have I got to lose? And so I tried, and I realized pretty quickly that I could actually feel a sense of calm, which I had never felt in my whole life. And that kind of evolved into my desire to learn more about the mind body connection, more about somatic work. What is meditation? Why does it work? What is trauma? How is it affecting my thoughts and behaviors and physical body and neuroplasticity and everything that went along with that? And I just spent many years just consuming a lot of that information and implementing things that resonated with me. And all the while working as a nurse and kind of realizing that the traditional medical system wasn't aligning with my own values and morals. I felt like I was not helping people the way that I was called to help people. So, yeah, that was, an evolution over the last 20 or so years. And then in early 2023, January 2023 is finally when I opened my own practice, doing what I do now, helping women overcome that trauma, overcome the emotional burden and the physical symptoms that come along with those traumatic experiences and chronic stress, and learn how to manage those things to live a life that they truly love and feel emotionally free.
Ah, wow. So much that I want to kind of dive into, but thank you first for sharing your story. There's a lot in there. And um, I think a lot of people could relate. While they might not have all of the things that you have in your background, in your life, there's always some things. And I believe now in particular, more than ever, we all have some kind of trauma in our lives that we need to overcome, or that we need to work on. So I'm just trying to figure out where to start with my questions. But first, can we go back to, you talked about like your mom had some of her own trauma and the multi-generations and things like that. So often we find when we dive into our own family stories and everything, and the ways that perhaps we were, even if it's not mistreatment, it's not being treated maybe the way we should be. And we can dive in and we can find out, oh, it's not the first time. It's something that was learned by before and before. So how can we break that cycle so that you obviously have become, no, this stops with me?
Yeah. The first step is awareness. Um, and really discovering your own like triggers, for lack of a better word, and then being able to identify them, and then asking yourself the really hard questions that most people don't want to ask, right? Because like when you're healing from trauma and you're asking those questions, you ask yourself, like, where did this come from? Why am I so triggered by this? Why is this such a button pusher for me? Or why am I reacting this way? Like, most people don't want to answer those questions because it's painful. You don't want to bring up, well, okay, I remember that time when I was 6 and blah, 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 or, whatever. And in my opinion, in my experience, it all goes back to our past, whether that's childhood or like early adulthood. All of our decisions, our behaviors, our actions now are all formed based on what we have experienced in the past. And our nervous system and our brain is so good at trying to protect us, and so good at trying to see into the future to prevent danger and to prevent more additional trauma, that you make decisions based on what you've been through. So the first step 100% is awareness. Just figuring out that they're noticing, recognizing that there is a problem, or recognizing like, gosh, I snapped at my kids, and like, I didn't, why did I snap at my kids? Like, I didn't want to snap at them, and figuring out like, where does that come from? Did you learn that behavior from your parents? Are you stressed and overwhelmed, and your parents were in that stress and overwhelmed state, and that's how you learned to regulate your nervous system, was in that fight mode? And I think once you can identify those, once you can like be aware of it and identify those issues, that's when you can really start to change it.
Right. So that kind of leads to my next question, where you detailed some of the symptoms that you were having: insomnia and panic and anxiety and other things. Can you give us a list for anybody who's listening of different ways that trauma shows up in our body, in our actions, so that people might be able to even get that little bit of awareness to go, oh, wait, maybe there's a bigger meaning behind this.
Yeah, I love that question, because the mind and the body are so interconnected that it can literally be any physical symptom can be either related to or caused by stress and trauma. They say 95% of illness is either caused by or worsened by stress. And that's 100% true. What I see clinically and in my own experience, and what I see in my friends and family, is um, that connection, that if you have, it doesn't matter how good you eat, how much you exercise, if you don't deal with that stress and trauma, you're going to have physical symptoms. And for each person, it really manifests differently. Chronic stress and trauma creates an environment of imbalance within your body, and different, every body and everybody is different, right? It affects every body differently. So like, when you have that chronic stress, you have high cortisol, you have high adrenaline, those are stress hormones. When you have high stress hormones chronically, and that you never see that system is designed to help you run from a tiger, but if you are running from a tiger when there's no tiger there, and your cortisol and your adrenaline and is always up, then you're going to have disruption in all of the other systems in your body. You can't think clearly, you can't digest your food properly, you can't make coherent cognitive decisions, you can't sleep properly, and it creates this cascade of other problems. So if you and micro inflammation throughout your body, because those stress hormones are inflammatory, and when you have them just circulating through your body all the time, it can create problems with your heart, it can create problems with your lungs, with your brain, with your kidneys. You can't detox properly, all of those things. So like, I see a lot of times, I see personally, I see a lot of like mood disorders. So like anxiety, depression, panic, and then insomnia. But I also see a lot of like gut complaints. So like bloating, diarrhea, constipation, abdominal discomfort, avoiding certain foods because I'm allergic to those, or headaches, joint pain, skin issues. Um, Really, like I think any physical symptom, there is some element to there is some element that's connected to the mind. Um, but yeah, those are some of the most common, I would say.
Would you go so far as to say that there could be a contributing factor to things like cancer, diabetes, other diseases?
100%. Yes, I absolutely believe. And it's so interesting if you know Dr. Joe Dispenza is a doctor that talks a lot about the spontaneous remission. His life's work is really surrounds spontaneous remission, and the idea that the he's studied in over 100 countries. I can't remember how many, but over 100 countries about what is the difference between people who get a terminal diagnosis, and um, live to outlive that diagnosis, or that prognosis, I should say, versus those who get that diagnosis and die. So when a doctor says you have 2 months to live or 6 months to live, what is the difference there? And hands down, the difference in everybody that he's ever studied, 100% of the time, the difference is their mindset and what they're telling themselves. Your thoughts matter, and what you're telling yourself matters. So I 100% believe that you can create an environment in your body that is so imbalanced that you can allow, not that you're manifesting or creating the cancer, like your thoughts are not creating that, but your thoughts are creating an environment in which cancer can grow or autoimmune conditions can start.
Right, that makes sense. Now you mentioned that you started by trying out meditation, and then you talked about somatic work. So I've heard a lot about somatic work lately. Can you start by just telling us what that is?
Yeah, so I define somatic as like getting out of your mind and into your body. So really feeling through things, and just even a simple just body scan, asking yourself, your mind, what does my body feel right now? Because I think that so many people are so in their head all the time that they're just completely disconnected from what their body actually feels. And are, you know, if you are experience a stressful drive to work, and then your body feels all tense, and your heart's racing and you're breathing really shallow, and you're never identifying that, you're just going to be in that state of hypervigilance, which is that sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight state. If you don't, I mean, you can ask yourself, you're going to end up feeling pretty crummy probably by the end of the day. But if you just take a second and stop and ask yourself, like, what am I feeling in my body? Like, oh, wow, I'm really tense in my shoulders. Like, I can actually make the tension go away. Like, I can just choose to release the tension in my muscles in my shoulders. Like, so really just being out of your mind and in your body, and asking yourself and feeling through those emotions.
So that's where somatic work would start, is just that feeling, because there's all kinds of programs out there, right? Somatic this, somatic that, buy this app, subscribe to this, all those kinds of things. You don't really need that.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people need guidance because they don't know how to do those things. So absolutely, like if you don't know how to do somatic work, then certainly buy that. But I actually was asked on another podcast, like, can anything be somatic? Because you hear now it's kind of a buzzword, right? You hear like somatic stretching, somatic walking, somatic yoga. I really think that anything can be somatic. It's really about like yoga, I think is an interesting one because I think by definition, yoga is a somatic experience because yoga is about breathing and feeling your body and slowing your mind down. But like somatic stretching, which is I guess similar to yoga, somatic walking, somatic breathing, like those are all like you could actually it is the piece that makes it the somatic is the mindfulness and the awareness of what's happening inside of your body and seeing that connection between the mind and the body during that time.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people will be a little bit relieved by that because it is a buzzword and it's being thrown around everywhere as kind of the newest, like, oh, you need this because it's somatic, right?
Yeah.
So thank you for that clarification. Um, so you talked about meditation and then you started diving into stuff. Did you ever go like the more traditional talk therapy route or any of that? Or were you focusing on mind body connection, neurology, all of that?
Yeah, I was in talk therapy my whole life. And frankly, it didn't help much in much of my early, in the earlier years, like my mom put me in counseling probably for the first time I had such bad anxiety when I was young. I think I was in counseling the first time probably in my early teen years for anxiety and for me it was really not helpful so much because we spent so much time just like rehashing everything that had happened all the time, which I think that there's a time and a place for that. And I'm not discrediting cognitive behavioral therapy. I think it's a valuable tool, but I think that too much of the time we spend just rehashing all of the details of the past and not actually looking for tools to get you moving forward into the future. And I think the most helpful thing for me was finding a therapist who was a trauma informed therapist who was certified in EMDR. EMDR is eye movement desensitization reprogramming. So it's a therapy tool where they use stimulation vibrations and stimulations in like physical things that you hold in your hand is at least what my experience was. I held little things in my hand that would buzz back and forth to get to reprogram basically the the memories using both sides of your brain. And that was super helpful, that in combination with the meditation, mindfulness, the breath work, the journaling, the paying closer attention to what I was eating because food is medicine, and my stress management, and paying really close attention to my sleep quality and that kind of thing, that kind of stuff. It was all in combination that I was able to, I say heal, but like I'm still healing. Like it's a lifelong journey.
Yeah. I actually found EMDR was really helpful for me as well with some of my stuff. But mine was all actually tapping. So when I was working with my therapist in person, she would tap like just my knees back and forth as we talked through stuff. And then she told me I could do it myself by kind of doing this because it's just the left, right tapping. So you don't need a electronic or whatever thing fancy. And you don't need anything fancy is what I'm trying
Yep.
to.
Yeah.
But what I'm really struck by is it's not one thing. It's
Yep.
a combination of things that might be a different combination for everybody, but we have to attack this kind of stuff in a multi-layered approach. It's not the magic pill or the one and done or anything, because we never know when things could come up. And I know that for a lot of people, the last 4 years in particular, because that's a worldwide trauma that we all went through, it triggered stuff. And it might not have, and you can tell, I hate using the words trauma and trigger because I think they're buzzwords that have been used a lot as well. But so many behaviors that we thought we'd conquered or gotten over showed up again during that time of always being on guard, always being in fight or flight, because we didn't know what was happening. We had no control. Nobody felt safe.
100%.
And
Yeah.
so we all could use a lot of this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a key point is it really is multifaceted and it has to be. And what works for me might not be what works for you. But the key is to find those tools that do work for you and start implementing them. And you have to start somewhere. Like, you don't compare your chapter 1 to my chapter 20. Like, you just start. And if it works for you and you find peace from it, then keep going. If somebody says, "Oh, take this pill, it's going to fix it," they're lying. There's no magic pill. There's no one singular thing that's going to help everybody. That it just doesn't exist. And we are all unique individuals, and it's going to be a unique healing process for each person.
Right. So tell me, you said that you're putting your story out there and it's become important. Why is it important for you to share your story?
My healing journey, like I said, I started with meditation, and that for me eventually evolved into um me having learning to have a relationship with God, and learning who God is, and who my creator is, and being connected to that source. And whether people call that the universe or God or source or Buddha, I don't know, like, it doesn't that's neither here nor there. It's like being connected to something bigger than myself. And I feel called by God to share my story. I spent a lot of years judging myself and feeling like I was being judged by other people, whether I was or not. I think probably not in most circumstances. Sure, certainly there's some people that are, of course, judgmental, but I think as a general whole, people did not judge me. But I would walk into a room and just think like, oh gosh, if these people only knew what I came from, like, they would never accept me. I had this kind of chip on my shoulder where I just always felt inferior and less than and undeserving. And I realized about 2 years ago that my story is powerful because it's a story of hope. I kind of had this moment, and I don't even know really what happened, like, that triggered that moment, but like, I really remember looking back and being like, oh my gosh, I freaking did it. Like, I feel like I really, like, broke the cycle, and I'm so aware of my the mind body connection in myself, and um the healing process, and that whole cycle and breaking the cycle. And my kids, who are now 3 and 8, are growing up so different than how I grew up, and the 5 generations that I know where that abuse took place in my family. Like, nobody in my family has grown up like my kids have grown up or growing up. So I really feel called by God to share my story as a story of hope, because I feel like if I could just empower even one person to understand that healing is always possible. That's kind of my slogan, is like, healing is always possible. I don't care what the diagnosis, the experience, the circumstance, anything. Healing is always possible. Don't ever let anybody tell you that it's not, because it is.
So true. And I, for one, so much of what you just said in your answer is kind of what I try to get across with my work and helping people realize that everybody has a story that can inspire someone else. Because that journey that you've been through, that I've been through, that anybody else has been through, no matter where they started and where they came to, is the story, is has the power to encourage someone else to take that first step as well. So thank you for being willing to share your story and for working with people to kind of get them through their hard times as well. I really appreciate that. And I know how much your clients and other people already appreciate it and will continue to appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really, really fulfilling, beautiful work. I feel like I'm living out exactly like what my assignment is. This is what I've been called to earth for, is exactly what I'm doing right now. It's amazing.
Awesome. So just quickly as we wrap up, if people want to know more about you and how you work with people, how can they find you?
My website is probably the best, holistichealthbymelissa.com. I'm also on all social media platforms. I'm mostly on Instagram and Facebook, but you can find me at Holistic Health by Melissa on everything.
Perfect. And we will include all of those links as we always do in our show notes and on our socials so that people can be sure to get connected with you and they didn't have to write those down as they're listening. Thank you so much, Melissa, for being here, for sharing your story and your journey with us all.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.